Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunday Open Q&A session. How's everyone going? Uh, just tune in on the chat feed. Let me know you're here. Let me know the sound's working. We're connected properly. And it's going to be an interesting session today, I think. Cool. All right, so there's an underlining theme to these questions. Because I can tell that not just by these questions, but generally speaking, when we're approaching this kind of work, um, it really shows where we're from in terms of where our mindset's at when the questions come up. And the big transition that I've noticed, the difficult part about moving, from one place to another, is really your orientation from where you begin. And so when you don't have that orientation reset, everything that you hear, everything that you read, all the information you come across, all the practices, the techniques, the tools you use, when you get into it, if you're coming from a place that isn't reorientated, you're going to end up getting to your destination, so to speak, and it's not going to be what you expect. Okay. So what do I mean by that? Well, a lot of the questions are coming from like, how do I do this? How do I go from not having this ability, not having this thing in my life, to having it? And unconsciously, this comes from what we would call a place of lack, or a place of not being it already, not doing it already. And it's a bit like, when I started looking at computing, because I was looking for a metaphor to explain these types of principles, these ways of thinking, this mindset, to describe what the brain and body and the energy system is doing and how it relates in what we consider this reality. I had to look at different areas, to be able to make some stepping stones, to be able to put some guideposts in place to be able to get this concept. Because once you get reorientated, everything's going to make sense. It's a bit like cryptography, right? So you're going to get all this data streaming in, and at first it's going to be encoded, it's going to be obscure, it's going to be abstract, and when you're looking at all this data, it's not going to make much sense. It's going to have a lot of ambiguity in there and a lot of mysticism. And without having the key, it's like trying to decode all that gibberish that comes through, that keeps your computer safe from people knowing your identity and your bank accounts and all that. Without the key, you're not going to really get anywhere. So the key here is to accept that everything that you perceive, everything that you're feeling, everything that you experience is coming from you. Okay? It's not happening to you. Your reality is not outside of you. It's being expressed from the center, the source of you. And that's kind of a hard concept to get into, because our whole life we've been conditioned that, we're not the center of the universe. We're sharing this experience with other people, that this space that we consider to be reality is something that's outside of us, that we're not connected to, that it's like this hostile environment that our body is constantly in battle with and trying to reach homeostasis with. And so the other thing is that this medium of information that we call reality responds to how we think and feel. And just like in the Matrix, where Neo's going through the construct programs to be able to understand what the Matrix is, and he does the jump program, and he jumps off the building and falls through the ground, and then he comes out of the program and he's bleeding, and he says, he says to Morpheus, I thought you said this wasn't real. And he says, the mind makes it real. So you've got to really start there in terms of, how your mind is set up makes your reality real to you. And so one of the questions I got, which I think is a great way to kick this off and to get sort of a bit more concrete on what I'm getting at here, is the question is, what is reality transurfing? And is this something that should be practiced or ignored? So the concept, I looked it up today because I hadn't heard the word reality transurfing until the question was posed to me, but I understand the concept. And so another way of putting it would be quantum jumping, or slipping through timelines, or time sliding through multiple dimensions, or observing different potential realities into existence and collapsing realities. And so the principle behind it is that we're living in this multi-dimensional universe with past, present, future, and alternate timelines existing all simultaneously, all at the same time. And through focused intent and observation, you start to collapse into a particular timeline reality, and that becomes your reality. And if you get really skilled at this, then you can theoretically at least travel between timelines, past, present, and future, and parallel, which basically means, moving beyond space and time. And then you have abilities like time travel and teleportation and things like that. Now, I think I mentioned this in one of another video I did a few months ago, is that when we think about time travel, when we think about teleportation, when we think about doing this, in our mind, our mind sorts for references, it sorts for illustrations and representations of how this might look and how this might be possible. And through media and the entertainment industry, we always get an outside view looking at someone doing it or someone experiencing it. We never really get an internal first-person view of what this may look like. And we never really get a really good explanation of how this may work. And so I'm going to try and attempt to explain how I understand it, at least. And like I said in other videos, this is my perspective, this is my art that I'm expressing here. So take it or leave it with a grain of salt. And if it works for you, then use it. And if it doesn't, keep going in your own search and your own research. But the idea here is that when you can change your focus, when you can change your energy signature, that you will magnetize yourself or tune into a potential timeline reality that already exists. It's not something you have to create. And this is where we go from, manifesting and creating your reality to just simply tuning into one that's already there and slipping into that energy signature and then arriving there. Now, to get a better understanding of this as well. Um, when we're talking about multiple dimensional timelines and infinite, we're talking about infinite potential timelines, past, present, future, and parallel. Most of these, are so closely related that you they're imperceptible. All right, um, they're so they're so similar that when you're slipping through them, that you don't recognize that you're actually doing it. And so the question, should this be practiced? Transurfing, using that terminology, is like, well, yeah, of course, but the thing is, you've got to realize you're already practicing this. Like, just to be here watching this video, attending this session, you have tuned in one way or another to be here in this particular time. Because if your energy wasn't tuned into receiving this message, you would be doing something else. You'd be somewhere else. You'd be experiencing a whole different set of circumstances and energy signature. So the idea here is like, okay, if I'm already doing it, then now is there a way to, hone that skill? And once again, this is not about doing more to hone that skill. This is becoming more aware and recognizing how you're already doing it. And the more that you focus on that, then the more available that skill will become to you. So it's not a question of, am I doing it right? Can I do it better? It's like, you're already doing it perfectly. The problem is, maybe you're not aware that you're doing it perfectly. And maybe the mind that you're doing it from, you haven't caught up to that yet to understand why it's choosing the timelines it's slipping into. So a lot of the time, we get this thing like, oh, but I didn't want that. And here I am in this kind of timeline where all this stuff's happening to me. And it's not what I really want, based on the personality consciousness that I think that I am. But, we're talking about this really amazing complex system that has a lot of different levels to it and layers to it. And a lot of it is operating unconsciously. And it's a good thing too, because if you're concentrating on how your heart was beating and the blood pressure and your lymphatic system and digesting and sending all the different signals through all the different neural networks and the pathways of your brain to go down to all the different nerve systems in your body to connect with all the muscle tissues and all that sort of stuff. Like, if I was having to think about how I spoke, like as soon as I try and think about how I'm speaking, I forget what I was speaking about, and it just becomes so complicated that you just can't do it. So you want this part of the unconscious mind to take over these processes, right? And just like when we start to take hold of these processes, like breathing, and so we go, okay, I notice that I'm stressing out in my life a little too much, and it's getting me, the hairs are going grey, or I'm putting myself into a state of dis-ease or whatever. I'm going to stop that now. So I'm going to start to relax. Well, how do I relax? Well, I'm going to start to take control of my breathing processes. I'm going to start to calm down and relax. And as I take control of my breathing, not really controlling it, but I focus on breathing in a particular way. I focus on getting more access to the controls of breathing. Then it's going to have all these knock-on effects, like slowing my mind down and putting it into an alpha state instead of a beta state. Or if I get really good at it and I master the alpha state, well, maybe I can drop into a theta state consciously. And so here's the thing, is that these functions that we're trying to get access to, that we're trying to get better at, we're already doing them all the time. It's just maybe our intention and our motivations are still yet unknown to us. And maybe that the level of mind that we're operating on is still not um, um, in touch with the actual level of mind that is making the decisions. And so we'll just pause there with that, because I know that that's a lot to sort of consider, and we covered a lot of ground very quickly. But these other questions all lead and dovetail into and funnel into the same principle here. So I'll go on to the next question and we'll keep going. And if you have any questions regarding the topics at the moment, just feel free to put them in the chat or send them through email or however you want to send them to me. And I can also expand on those. So the next question, what is it about driving that puts you into a hypnotic state of mind? And so once again, I know that we're conscious that when we're on an open road and we're driving, and especially a very straight road, or one with not many bends in it and not much stimulation, we start to slip in to an altered state of mind, and you can start to notice it sometimes. Sometimes you'll notice it and sometimes you won't notice it. But it's been accepted that when we're going through these road trips, that we'll slip in and out of different states, and we'll get time distortion or time slippage. We'll feel like time disappeared, or it's taking longer than it usually does, or it's shorter than it usually does. And so we recognize that we're in a hypnagogic state or a hypnotic state when we go into these driving patterns. And the simple answer to that is the conscious mind has this mundane task, okay? And it's occupied by driving the car and keeping it on the road and making sure everything's safe and that you're getting to where you're going to go. And it's got a task to do. So this is like, we give the monkey mind something to do so it doesn't attack the mind, doesn't turn in on itself. It's focused outward. And as that part of the mind is focused outward, all the unconscious processes, all that higher level of mind is not interrupted. It's almost like, when the child's playing with their toys, the parent can go, oh, okay, now I can read the newspaper, or I can watch my show, or I can do the taxes now, or I can, get dinner prepared, or I can just chill out and relax and let my mind become more organized and sort itself out, and tune into a more relaxed state of being. And I released a short video a few months ago, maybe 6 months ago, and it was called "It's All Hypnosis Now." And so this is, once again, like I was talking about in the entertainment area, is that we perceive that hypnosis looks a certain way, like it's people on stage and it's the hypnotist dancing around, and he says sleep, and the person falls down in their chair, and then they start, gives a few ridiculous commands, and then they start walking around like thinking they're chickens, or doing weird, sort of carrying out weird kind of commands, right? But the thing is, we're going in and out of hypnotic states all the time. The brain is slipping in and out of these states all the time. Even these mystical experience states that we're trying to achieve through practices like meditation or spiritual practices and techniques, we're slipping in and out of these states constantly. Just like we're tuning into these multiple timelines at least internally in our mind all the time. And a small, simple example is when you're going towards a destination that you've been to a million times before, and you know that there's multiple routes there. And depending on the time of the day, there'll be traffic. So what will happen is you will automatically, without even thinking about, start visualizing multiple routes to get there. And then you'll select one. And then when you get to that approaching intersection, you'll get a gut feeling and you'll make a snap decision to go left or right and take that route or this route. And so we just do that, and we do that without thinking about it. But what's actually going on here? Well, it's kind of like, without using the GPS on your phone, you pop out of your body, you look at the whole city on a map, you see the routes being plotted out towards your destination, and it calculates and does all this thing, gives you all the information, and then you sort through those options and you select one, and then you pick that route, and then you come back in your body and then you act it out. And it all happens so quickly that you don't even realize that you're doing it. And so this is what I'm talking about. It's not necessary always to practice these things, unless you want to tune your attention into focusing more on what aspect of that ability or skill you're already doing. It's like I had this conversation the other day about meditation. And meditation, I said, meditation is not a vehicle, it's a tool, okay? And I've heard people say that meditation, the definition of meditation is to become familiar with, but I've also heard that meditation is the meaning is to become in touch with reality. And so if you're practicing these states and abilities by tuning into how you're already doing them and focusing upon them more and more, then at first you might use meditation to activate these things and to get yourself focused on them. But once you're tuned into them, if you're living it in reality, then the meditation is no longer necessary for that particular reason. Does that make sense? So, here's the thing, and this is just a sidebar here, is that when we're going deeper and we're becoming more aware of how we do all this stuff, and we become more aware with the nature of reality as being more like a lucid dream, then the first thing we do is, oh, well, how do we dream more lucidly? How do we live lucidly? How do we do lucid living? And the thing is to first realize that you already are. You know, how do you become lucid in a dream? Well, first you have to realize that you're dreaming, okay? And so, like with the question about hypnotic states, it's when are you not in a hypnotic state? You know, where does a hypnotic state begin and where does one end? Is a hypnotic state only when you're in an alpha state or a theta state? Or does a hypnotic state go into delta as well? Does it come all the way up into high beta? Does it go into gamma states? Is it all of those? You know, how long's the piece of string, so to speak? So one thing that we've realized is that hypnotic states are happening all the time. And just because they don't look like what you're used to thinking a hypnotic state is, doesn't mean that you're not in one already, okay? It's just to what level and varying degrees and for what purposes. And the next question is a good one too. Is there exercises we can do to see energy more clearly? And so just stacking on what I've been talking about, when you're looking at energy, it's a bit like you have to understand that the eyes, the optic nerve, the visual cortex in the brain, the light that's coming in through there and it's creating the image inside the mind, that the eyes, like a camera, see everything, okay? Even if you're not tuned in and focused upon what it is, it picks up on all the light spectrum, okay? But it's only printing a certain amount of what you're focused on. And so it's like, well, how do we see the energy fields, say, around a tree or a plant or a bird or a person or a thing? Well, first you have to realize that it's all energy, first of all, that everything does have an energy field around it, or a blueprint of energy. And then you have to realize that it's there all the time, even if you're not seeing it at first. And then it's like, okay, well, if it's already there, then, and I'm actually seeing it, but I'm not perceiving it, then what is it about my mind that is not allowing me to see it? Well, how am I ignoring that? Okay, because the rods and cones in the eyes are picking up that information anyway. Just like if you had a camera, and most cameras do this now, or even the old ones back in the 10, 20 years ago, they had a switch where you could switch it to infrared, and you could see the infrared spectrum of an image. And now you can get thermal cameras. Now you can get, we've got X-rays are there. We know that X-rays are always there. You just need to have the tools to perceive them. And so, okay, we're already seeing this. We're not sure how we're seeing it, but it's there. It's a potential. It's possible to be able to see these energy signatures. So how do we tune our brain in to be able to perceive what's already there that we're not seeing? It's a bit of a conundrum, right? So let's take a leaf out of the scientist books, what are they called? Astrologist book. And let's look at how they find planets in, black space. So what they do is they don't look for the planet, they look for the effect of the planet. So they look for wobbles in stars or in the light from stars. And they know that if a star is, say, behind, like say this is a star, and light should just come straight through, that if there's a planet there that's creating gravity, then there'll be a wobble to the light and it'll look like it's fluxing. And so they know that something's there, and then they can tune their focus into that space, and then they can go through different methods of lensing, and then they can eventually tune in and find the planet. Another example is, back during the Cold War and nuclear submarines and all that sort of stuff. What was it, that movie, The Hunt for Red October, where they're looking for that nuclear submarine? And it had this Caterpillar drive, silent drive on it. So you couldn't pick it up on sonar. They couldn't hear it like they could detect other vessels in the past. So what they did is they devised a way of looking for the wake that it would produce. And if they found the wake, then they would know that the ship was there. And this is really interesting, is that the brain has a way of creating or revealing to itself what would be causing the effect of those things. So if you just look at a plant, for example, or a bush, or sometimes a bird going past, even on a cloudy day like today here in Sydney, it's overcast, it's a bit rainy, it's this really white overcast day. And so, you can just start to stare into the sky. And it's interesting because it starts to blend where the clouds begin and end and where the sky starts and finishes. And all of a sudden, your brain will start to pick up on the different nuances in that scene. And already I can start to see little flickers of energy, like I think the term is globule. All right. Another way of describing it would be like if you're a scientist looking under a microscope and seeing all these millions of little sperm floating around in space. And so the idea here, or at least one aspect of looking at it, is that all this energy is moving around and popping in and out of existence constantly. And whenever there's something in our reality, it's a coagulation, it's a collapsing, it's a convergence and a condensing of all these little bits of energy into one solid, perceptively solid object. And so it collapses there just like a planet would or a star would. But as this becomes more solid and more real, there's all this transition in and out of that space where there's this wake going on. There's this exhaust, this wobble happening around it that creates this field, right? And so if you can start to become aware that that's happening all the time with everything, not just living things, with seemingly solid, not living things as well, you can start to see that this is all just one big energy field condensing and collapsing and pulling away from itself and drawing itself to itself, constantly moving from one form to another. Some things stay in their form a lot longer than others. But if we want to look at this on a personal level, it's like when we get up in the morning and we go to, get in the shower, and we come out and we do our hair or our face and we get dressed and whatever, we see ourselves as ourselves every day. And each time, when we go to sleep and out through the day and whatever things happen to us, we get slightly changed and altered based on our thoughts and our reactions and our perceptions to what how we're moving through this quantum soup of energy. And to us, the transurfing, the quantum jumping happens so subtly most of the time, because we're not aware of the shifts that are happening unless they're dramatic, inspiring, mystical, or traumatizing, right? And so we won't notice until we take a break and have a look back. It's just like, I don't know if you've, usually we do this on a birthday. We go, oh God, or we look at an old video of ourselves or an old photo, or we run into an old friend and we suddenly get at least an internal map, an internal picture of the distance and the path that's being traveled from one point in space-time to another point in space-time. And that's usually You know, when we take a breath, we realize just how far we've come. Um, Now, here's the other thing about transurfing or jumping timelines, and I've mentioned this before, is that when you start doing this, um, it's a bit like, you know, Morpheus when he warns Neo with the pills. He says, you know, after this, there is no turning back. In other words, when you start jumping, um, you're not going to be able to return to the same timeline that you were in. It's like a river flowing. You know, you might go back to the same place in the river and you might make the same steps that you made, but it's a new river completely. And so you're stepping into that seemingly same place in the river for the first time all over again. And you know, you're going to be required to deal with those changes and those adjustments internally and externally. And so when the question came up, you know, should we practice this? It's like, yes, we should practice this, but we should also practice preparing for these distortions, these decompressions as well, because the farther you jump in through time, time spaces, the bigger the changes you make, the bigger the adjustment you need. It's just like getting jet lag, you know, on a plane. Some flights, you know, you get on, you do your flight, you get off, the time difference is no big deal. You're still in the same sort of timeline vicinity. And then others, you know, you travel halfway around the world, you lose a day, you gain a day, you wake up, you're in a totally different time zone, totally different country, different culture, different language. And it takes a while to adjust. It's very disorientating. And so we want to be practiced at this type at adjusting to the travel, because the travel itself is not such a big deal. You know, we're doing that all the time. And so can you see now where I'm coming from is that it's not about trying to acquire anything. It's not about trying to get anywhere. It's not even about, you know, whether you can or can't. You're already doing it. You've been doing it the whole time, but it's not something you've been aware of. It's like I've met so many masters of skills, you know, who, when you say like, how do you do that? You know, describe to me how you do it. Often they have to, you know, really think about it for a minute because they're not sure how they do it. They just do it and they know that they can. And to think about how to tell you how to approach it is a real challenge for them. Like, oh God, how do I talk about this? I mean, how do I put it? I'm sure you've heard that a lot. People say, oh, how do I put this? I'm not sure how to word this. It's not that they don't know how to do it because they're doing it so unconsciously, it's second nature to them. But it's how do they put it in a way that someone else can grasp it and start to move towards it? And often it's not anything to do with the skill itself. It's all about how to see the problem, the skill, the ability, the how to see the energy, I guess, in the first place. Because how to get that key. Once you've got the key, all of the encoding, all the cryptography makes sense. It all just starts to, you know, open up and change right before your very eyes, sort of thing. And so, is this making sense? Are you guys still with me? Because I feel like I'm just taking off, and I'm off to the races at the moment. I've recently become aware that I do that, that I can go a little bit too fast. Okay, good. And leave people in the dust without meaning to. And so here's the thing, here's the thing about um, meditation for me now is that, in the beginning, it used to be, okay, I need to sit and meditate so many times a day. And now that I'm doing it so many times a day, now I need to do it longer each day. And then now I need to meditate on this subject or this principle or this technique. But the problem is with that is that you're always trying to get to it. It's like one day I'll be wealthy. Well, it's always in your future. How are you ever going to be it? How, the thing is, how do you attract that into your life if you're not being it already? If you're not an energetic match to it, then how can you bring it into you? So the thing is, how do you be it now without any evidence in your life? And so this is where we get really creative, and this is where we scale up in the mind, okay? And this is where it gets kind of radical, and this is where a lot of people have trouble because, they start to think it's egotistical and it's selfish and all that sort of stuff. But I really encourage you to try this on and just give it a go for a little while, and just, start off with, when you go into meditation, just start off and relax and close your eyes and just realize that, everything you perceive, you are the center of all of that. Okay. You can imagine yourself outside of yourself, looking at yourself, experiencing things, and you can do that anywhere, but no one else has the perception of life that you have. Okay. And you really physically don't have any other perception outside of being inside looking out. So you don't really know if there's anything else outside of this. Just like when you're dreaming, everything inside that dream is you being projected into the dream for you to observe, even though it feels like you're not. That feeling of being separate and observing something as not you is part of you and you dreaming the dream. Making sense? So let's use wealth, for example, because I know everyone wants wealth and wants money. Okay. So when you go, okay, I want to manifest like a new car. I want to manifest my dream car. So you start looking at cars on the internet. You start researching them. You start learning more about it until you can picture the car really clearly in your mind. And you go, first of all, you go, okay, my goal is to have that car and to drive around in it. And that's a symbol of me achieving my goal. And so what a lot of people do is they go, well, each day that goes by that I'm not driving that car must mean I'm not doing something right or I'm failing. But it's like, no, every time you see a picture of that car, every time you see it on the street parked, every time you see it drive past, every time you hear someone talking about it, every time you see it on a film, every time it shows up anywhere in your perception, that's you tuning into that, that new potential. That's you transurfing and meeting all those checkpoints, just like if you're a backpacker and you're going to, the golden city of Lhasa in Tibet, then, each day that you travel, leave your house and you get to, you take the taxi to the airport across the continent, and then you start making your way to the golden city. If you woke up every day and went, well, I'm not there yet, so I mustn't, it must be not working, then you would never arrive there, right? But you don't do that when you're traveling. You go, okay, I'm getting closer. I'm getting closer. Now I'm a few days out. Now I've got to go from here to there, and I take the bus, and maybe I'll get on a donkey and go over the mountains or whatever it is. But you know that you're moving closer towards that. And the other thing is, you're starting to feel that you're on track, right? And when you're on track, then it doesn't matter that you're not there yet. You relax because you're on track and you enjoy the journey. You enjoy getting there. And so one of the things that when it came to wealth that was really good that Tony Robbins did is that he would look at ways, even though he might not have the symbol of the money in the bank, he would look at all the ways that he's already wealthy. So he would go, okay, in comparison to, 2/3 of the world, I'm in the top so and so percent of wealth. And then he'd say things like, I have access to the library, so I have all this information at my disposal. I can learn all I need to know about finance for free through going to the library. And so here's the thing: it's the feeling of being wealthy. What is that? Is it carefreeness? Is it freedom? I guarantee you, it's not the symbol. Okay, because if you were on a desert island and you had all your cash around you, and you were starving, then that's not wealth, because wealth would be having enough food to feel like you were never hungry. So wealth is a whole different cat, and it doesn't always show up the way you think it will. So you have to really expand the mind out and expand the scale and start to take in more potential timeline realities other than this, narrow track of this is how life is and this is how it should look when I achieve it. One thing I learned in martial arts is that you can learn all these techniques and styles, and there's a lot of one-upmanship in all these fields that we're in, where this is the best technique, or that's the best style, or this is the best teacher, and that's the best guru, and really at the end of the day, if you're not living how you want to live and being, and feeling that you're connected to your reality in a way that that's what you want, then all these techniques and all these styles, they mean nothing. Just like, so many times we've seen the 10th Dan black belt get knocked around by, the scrapper street fighter kid on the side of the road who just walks into the dojo. And it's because, what are you focused on? Are you focused on the effectiveness of being what you want, or you're focusing on collecting all this intellectual capital around you? So so just to recap, you're already it. You're already being it. You already have access to it. And rather than striving to get there, which is causing more stress and more strain, maybe just first of all become aware that you're already doing it and that you're already there. And maybe you're not seeing it. And you're like, well, what is it? What is it about my perception, my orientation, that is stopping me, not allowing me to notice it? And so meditation for me now is about either expanding my awareness or aligning my awareness to the mind that has already got everything underway and is actually leading me to what I really want, not what I think I want. And when I say leading, I mean it's it's already made. It's all there for me already. It's just a matter of whether I'm tuning into it or not. Does that make sense? So do you have any questions about that so far? Yeah, so it's more about like, what if you already have the keys to the vault? You know, what if it's kind of, what came up the other week? It was like, it was some joke. It was like, okay, it was when Harry got married and he had his Bucks night, the joke was something like, when you all your friends are trying to make more money or something, but your nan's on the note. Like it's a totally different perspective where it's like everyone's trying to get to acquire this thing, but what if you were like, well, that's to you that's meaningless because it's already all yours anyway. So when I say that, I mean like with reality, rather than trying to obtain and acquire things within this reality, it it wouldn't make sense if you knew that this was all you anyway. It'd be like me trying to acquire all these books on my shelf all over again through this crazy, you know, racket that I set up. So I put in a barrier that says I can't have it until I do X, Y, and Z. But it's like it doesn't make sense if they're already mine. So sometimes the thing that the limitation um, that you're trying to overcome is something you've put there for yourself because maybe you like the stress or you're conditioned to like stress, or you're trying to keep up appearances because that's a habit or whatever. And it's like, well, maybe you know what if you dispense with all that? Then how would that change? Another example of that is when the McDonald's system first started. They didn't look at what else do we need. They looked at what can we remove that's slowing the process down. And so that's when you had the McDonald's system, and we all know about what how quickly and large McDonald's has grown. And this is, like I said, enlightenment is a destructive process in terms of reducing down to removing all those things that are in your way that you put there for the sake of novelty and to keep things interesting for yourself. And so one of the reasons why I wanted to have Q&A um, is to get everyone to learn how to construct questions. Because when you construct a question, if you really look at it, and here's a key for you, is that the answer is in your question. If you can get enough perspective on it. So how are we going so far? Is this good for you? Is this helping? And so when we're talking about So when we're talking about transurfing, we'll use the word, but or timeline jumping or time sliding or reality slipping through different dimensions of reality. Um, we don't necessarily need to have this huge, massive, dramatic, traumatic shift or this massive mystical experience, because the whole thing's a mystical experience, right? If you really want to trip yourself out, just sit down and look at your body and go, how does this do this? How does, if I cut myself, how does it heal? Like, how does it know to heal there? And how does the finger know to stop growing at that length? And like, how does, when I hear sound and I hear someone's voice, how do I translate that into language? How do I make all those vibrations sound like into English? And then how do I know what those words mean? And how is it that we've somehow agreed on the meaning? There's so much complexity to all this thing. You can just you know trip yourself out and have a real psychedelic experience without anything at all, right? And so we're doing this all the time. Each time we participate at all in this reality, we're slipping into some multiple universe, multiple timeline reality. And so, this is why, affirmations was such a big thing, is because each time, think of a ship going across the ocean. Each time you have a thought, a feeling, take some action, you're changing the course of that ship. Now, unfortunately, most people, when they make changes, they make a change and then they course correct back to what they're used to. And they end up where, or at least thinking, they end up in the same space in the river, even though it's a different river, thinking that it's the same thing, right? Just like all these huge cargo ships going from one port back to the next. It's the same place backwards and forwards, even though it's the same place in a different timeline. Okay. But if you really want to end up somewhere else, then it's about making enough of these changes frequently enough until you end up, at this focused intent, your focused intention on this new destination. But what most people want is not just to move around within what they know, is that they want to get out of what they know into an unknown place that they're going to enjoy, that they're going to love when they get there. And so that's an interesting skill. How I'd recommend to do that is to tune into the feeling you want to have when you get there, first of all. And each time you tune into the emotion of being in that unknown space, having that experience of, hey, this is amazing, I'm having so much fun, I never knew this even existed, I love this, then you have to have that feeling first. And then what happens is your reality conspires to set that up for you, and it presents you with something that's outside of your awareness, that was always there, that matches you in that feeling. But the funny thing is that once you do this over and over, then it doesn't really matter where you are or what you're doing when you experience that, because it's the feeling that you've practiced anyway without having it there. So then it doesn't really matter what the circumstances and the reality that you manifest shows up as, because you know that you're in control. You're the source of that feeling anyway. So you might as well just be sitting on the couch feeling that way and blissing yourself out. And just, allowing whatever images to come to mind. But what gets really exciting is when it shows up and you're not expecting it. And so that, this is all about for me, this is getting into, you know, training in certain states, right, and then leaving it open, leaving the details wide open, so you can get that novelty coming into you. Because otherwise, it's kind of like, oh, you know, I really like chocolate, love chocolate. Chocolate's my favorite thing, and even though I'm not gonna, you know, I don't want to have it all the time. I want to have access to it enough so whenever I want it, it's right there. And, you know, so then you know it's at the store and you can just go anytime to get it. And then when it's always there, it's not kind of not as much fun. So then you create all these silly little games with yourself that I'll only have it to reward myself when I do something that I don't want to do. And so you do all this crazy stuff just so you can have the chocolate that's already there that you know is so easy just to go get, right? So it's this weird thing where you just sort of cycle around, and it's you're creating all this stuff just to keep yourself interested. Funny little game we play with ourselves. It's like hide and seek from yourself. So there you go. There's nowhere to go. There's nothing to do. There's no one to be, right? So this is where I come back again. You know, this is about playing the game. You know, you're playing the game not to win, not to acquire stuff, not to get to the end even, because, you know, once you get to the end, you just start over again. So now you're playing for the game's sake. You're playing for the skill. You know, you're playing because that's all there is to do. And so maybe the very challenges that you have in your life that you think are preventing you from having what you want are actually what you really want. Because if you had what you want, then it's like the chocolate. You say, oh, okay, well, I can have it any time. It's it's not that exciting anymore. You know, I don't get that rush of reward when I have it. So you know, then it falls into kind of like addiction. It's like, you know, an addict needs more and more to get the same feeling as they did when they first started out. And so maybe the real thing we should be practicing is to not participate, you know, for a little while. So when we do, it's exciting again. You know, it's like people you know, they're in their life and they're bored with their life and they can't, you know, I need a holiday, and then they go on holiday, they have this great time, and then they get exhausted from the holiday, and then they're at the end, you know, they've had enough sun, they've had enough pineapples and coconuts, and they're like, oh God, you know, I'm ready to go home now. I'm ready to get back into it. So this, you know, you know, moving through time, moving through reality. It's kind of like being a sailor, you know. After you've sailed around the world a few times and you've been through a bunch of storms and you've fought off pirates and had some adventures, and you got your stash of gold in the hollowed out volcano in an island that no one knows about, you know, then you're just sailing for the sake of sailing because, you know, you're good at it now. And why would you stop something that you're good at? And so, like I mentioned this to someone the other day, it's like, because there's always more. There's always more to learn. There's always more of the unknown to explore, or at least from the perspective that we can forget that maybe we've already done it all. And that maybe you're already a master of all these things. And maybe one of the things that you're really good at is tricking yourself and convincing yourself that you're not already it. And so you put all these obstacles in your way and all these challenges just to keep it interesting. Which reminds me of a guy who he was a permaculture expert. And so what he did is he started out developing useless blocks of land, seemingly useless blocks of land to the old model of farming, into productive plots of land that produce surpluses of fruit and vegetable and all sorts of livestock. And at first, you know, they would sell their surplus to get more tools and develop land further, and then they'd get a second block and a third block, and pretty soon they had so many blocks going and so many teams making those blocks, and you know, there was so much surplus going on, and they were getting contracted by people all over the world to, you know, develop their property, and they were paying ridiculous amounts of money to do this, and so, you know, they'd go into a community, like a commune, a hippie commune, for example, that didn't have anything, but they had all this great land, and they helped them set up all these little bits and pieces here and there, and you know, to get people interested, they said, okay, well, what do you need first? And they said, oh, we need a bakery. So they go, okay, we'll create all this permaculture surplus food going out, we'll feed everyone, and whatever we don't use, we'll sell off, and then with the money we make, we'll create a bakery, so now everyone in the community can have bread. And they did that, and then they had too much bread, so then they sold off the bread. I said, what do you need now? And they said, well, you know, we probably need a community hall, so they did that. And then people at the community hall started all this craft stuff, and everyone had, you know, sweaters and beanies in winter and scarves, and then pretty soon they were making more than they needed, and then they sold that as well, and then they had more money coming in out of that, and they're like, well, now what do you need? And they got to the point where they had their own fire department, and they had their own airport, and everything was crazy, right? And so this guy, to keep him interested, you know, because he had everything that he needed, he would create ridiculous little rewards for these huge tasks and huge projects to complete. And he said one day, you know, his favorite thing is blueberry ice cream, but if anyone bought him an ice cream maker for his birthday or Christmas, that he would kill them, because that was the only thing keeping him interested in continuing to do what he was good at. And so, you know, maybe that's where we've arrived over these, you know, billions of years and multiple lives and all that sort of stuff, is that it's like, okay, well, now what? And I think, you know, the answer to that, the simple answer is, now we just play the game for the game's sake, and be aware that we're doing that, and then decide on whether we want to make it more complicated or easier in certain areas of our lives. And if it's getting too complicated, you know, trim it back, make it easier. And if it's getting too easy and boring, then, you know, add a bit of complexity in there. But this whole thing about, you know, killing your old life off to have a new one, like, it seems fanatical and a bit extreme to me, when if you understand the principle of transurfing, timeline jumping, multiple timeline sliding, then you can just start to navigate your way, like a retiree sailing across the world in their own time, their own way. You can just decide, I'm going to go from here to there, and I'm going to do this when I get there. And, it becomes a lot less complicated, a lot less stressful. So I think, we've all had enough stress in our lives. Would you agree? Or maybe you still want to keep going with it, have a little bit more? Because, you can always add more stress. That's easy. It doesn't really take any effort at all. Why do you think we have to have obstacles in order to get what we want? I think it just makes it a bit more interesting, I think, it's like I was talking about indoor rock climbing the other day. You can practice all manners of movements individually in a gym situation. You get some bars and some rings and some resistance bands and an open space and some weights, and you can practice all these movements, and you can develop this strength and ability to move in the same way. But actually doing it on the wall and solving a problem, that's the interesting part. Otherwise, you're sort of just getting in there and repeating movements over and over. It can get a bit boring. I can't imagine what some of the mind games Arnold Schwarzenegger would have had to play on himself to be Mr. Olympia like 7 or 8 times in a row. Going to the same gym on the same machines, doing the same movements over and over again. That would have taken a lot of focus and a lot of willpower to get through all that to succeed in the way that he had in that time. So, do we have any more questions? Anything you want me to expand on or collapse in on before we wrap up? Does it make sense to reorientate yourself first? Yeah. Cool. Yeah, so just I think the focus is to reorientate first before you start venturing out. All right, everyone. Thank you very much for attending. And let me know how you go. If you have any, get lost or whatever, feel free to reach out. And I'll see you all very, very soon. Once again, life hacks coming up. If you're having any challenges or sticking points that you're getting stuck with or struggling with, or you just want more clarity on or a different perspective on, I'll see you. When is it? Tomorrow, sometime, wherever you are, whatever continent you're in, and we can go through them there. All right, thanks everyone, and bye for now.